A caged alien was his prize, but he set her free and made her his wife. The cage and the stars, the stench of metal, oil, and ozone clung to the open-air docks of Tarnus 4, where warships loomed like predators and traders barked offers in 1,000 tongues beneath the smoky sky. Sergeant Rowan Hale moved with the ease of a soldier long accustomed to strange worlds and stranger customs. His unit had been victorious in the latest skirmish against the Catherine insurgents, another liberation mission, as command so often called them. It was victory, yes, but it tasted bitter, like ash on his tongue. Rowan had not asked for rewards, yet rewards came all the same. He stood stiffly as the quartermaster approached, flanked by 2 heavily armed guards who dragged between them a small barred containment unit. Inside, crumpled against the metal floor, was a figure so out of place it was almost surreal. A girl, no, a young woman, alien in the most literal sense, yet hauntingly human in shape and sorrow. Her skin shimmered with the faintest hues of violet and silver, like moonlight trapped under flesh. Her hair, cascading in tangled waves, seemed woven from strands of starlight. Her clothes, if they could be called that, were little more than rags, torn and soiled from rough handling. Yet it was her eyes that arrested Rowan. Their deep liquid darkness held no hatred, no fear, only a tired, stubborn dignity. "Your prize," the quartermaster said with a smug grin. "From the governor himself. Spoils of war. She's a Kithaerin, rare and obedient once broken in." Rowan's stomach twisted. A pet. That was how they saw her. He heard himself muttering a stiff thanks out of habit, his mind already recoiling from the scene around him. Other soldiers watched, some laughing quietly, others whispering bets about how long it would take to tame her spirit. Rowan bent down slightly, meeting the girl's gaze through the bars. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. It was almost as if she was daring him to look deeper, to see her not as an object, not as property, but as something infinitely more profound. He straightened slowly, hands curling into fists at his sides. Orders were orders. Refusing a gift from the governor could brand him disloyal, mark him for punishment far worse than reassignment. The girl remained silent as they hauled the cage onto the hover cart and wheeled it toward the barracks. Rowan followed, feeling a leaden weight settle in his chest. He told himself he would figure something out later, that he would find a way to undo this injustice without losing his head to the tribunal, that he would not be like the others. Yet as the cart disappeared down the loading corridor and the girl's midnight eyes locked onto his one last time, a terrifying truth burned through him. Later would not be soon enough. The caged girl was deposited into Rowan's quarters with all the ceremony of delivering a box of ammunition. The guards left without a word, leaving him alone with her in the dimly lit room. It was not much. A utilitarian bed bolted to the floor, a small desk, a window that looked out onto the endless, churning clouds of Tarnus 4. Spartan, cold, impersonal, and now impossibly filled with a life he was wholly unprepared for. Rowan knelt beside the cage again. Up close, he saw the bruises on her wrists where shackles had once dug too deeply. Her feet were bare and raw, her lips cracked from dehydration. Yet her posture remained stubbornly upright, and her eyes remained steady. He reached for the control panel on the side of the cage, hesitated, then deactivated the lock. With a soft hiss, the door swung open. For a long moment, neither moved. Rowan sat back on his heels, raising his hand slightly, a universal sign of peace. "You're free to move," he said quietly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl tilted her head, studying him. Her fingers tightened slightly on the cage bars, then released slowly. With the careful grace of a creature not yet certain whether the trap had truly vanished, she stepped out. Rowan saw now just how slight she was, shorter than him by a head, thin almost to fragility, yet every line of her spoke of coiled strength, a wild creature forced into stillness. "You have a name?" he asked. She hesitated. Her voice, when it came, was soft but firm. "Lysa." Rowan nodded, committing the name to memory as though it were something precious. He offered his hand, palm open. No pressure, no command. "Lisa," he repeated. "I'm Rowan." She looked at his hand for a long time, as if weighing 1,000 dangers. Finally, cautiously, she placed her fingers against his palm. They were cool and trembling but strong. Rowan exhaled slowly, feeling some of the tension leak from the air between them. "I'm not going to treat you like they would," he said, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't expected. "Not ever." Lisa's eyes searched his face for a long, searching moment. Then almost imperceptibly she gave the barest nod. He rose to his feet, moving slowly so as not to startle her, and crossed to the desk. He rummaged through the rations he had stored, pulling out a sealed packet of water and a nutrient bar. When he turned back, he found Lisa had not moved from her spot, but her gaze had softened slightly, the weary sharpness retreating behind a glimmer of something almost like hope. He handed her the water first. She took it, her fingers brushing his briefly as she drank. Rowan sat heavily on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. How the hell had it come to this? In another life, another time, he might have accepted the governor's gift without thought, might have even congratulated himself on being favored. But something in Lisa had shattered the old certainties, the easy lies that conquest could be justified, that subjugation could be civilized. No. What he saw when he looked at her was not a prize. It was a person. And whether he liked it or not, his life, his real life, had just begun the moment she stepped out of that cage. Unspoken, undeniable, irreversible. The days that followed unfolded with the slow caution of two wild creatures learning to trust the absence of a hunter's snare. Lisa stayed close to the far wall of the room at first, never truly relaxed, never completely turning her back. She accepted water, food, even the blankets Rowan offered her without protest. But it was clear that somewhere deep within her, survival instincts remained coiled tight, ready to snap. Rowan didn't push her. He spent his hours on duty, or feigning, normalcy among the other soldiers, careful never to speak of what lived behind his closed door. His bunkmates teased him in passing about his prize, nudging and winking, expecting stories he refused to tell. Every word he did not say was another grain of suspicion, but Rowan didn't care. There was only one thing that mattered now: keeping Lisa safe and keeping her spirit from breaking. Each evening, when the compound dimmed to the artificial dusk of Tarnis's endless storms, Rowan returned to the small haven of his quarters. He'd sit by the window, watching the far-off flashes of lightning arc across the clouds, sometimes reading from his old datapad, sometimes simply existing beside her. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Lisa began to drift closer. First, she sat on the floor just a few feet nearer than the night before. Then she accepted a seat at the desk when Rowan wasn't using it. Then, finally, one evening, he found her sitting cross-legged on his bed, studying the datapad he had, left there by accident. Rowan froze in the doorway, unsure whether to apologize or back away. She glanced up at him, the ghost of something mischievous in her gaze. "You read these symbols," she said, her voice tentative, still thick with her native accent. Rowan nodded. "It's a human language, English. I could teach you if you want." Lisa tilted her head, considering. Knowledge is freedom. The phrase struck him harder than a bullet. He sat down on the floor across from her, careful to leave space between them. "All right," he said, his voice rough with unspoken emotion. "Let's start." That first night, they traced words together in the dim light, basic ones at first. Water, sky, freedom. She repeated them back to him with fierce concentration, stumbling sometimes, laughing softly at her own mistakes. Her laughter was like nothing Rowan had ever heard, a sound so pure and unexpected that it left him momentarily breathless. As the days became weeks, the language between them grew, not just words and grammar, but gestures, looks, small rituals of daily life that said more than conversation ever could. He learned the way she hesitated before reaching for food, the way she stiffened when someone pounded too hard on the door outside. She learned the way his eyes softened when he spoke to her, the way his hand hovered protectively when others got too close. And somewhere in those long, quiet nights, an unspoken truth began to take root. Rowan was no longer protecting Lisa because he pitied her. He was protecting her because somewhere along the way she had become precious to him in a way he could not deny. The first crack in the fragile world Rowan had built came on the edge of a storm. Tarnus was infamous for its tempests. Roaring gales that could strip metal from buildings, lightning that split the sky into burning veins. But this storm was different, heralded by crimson clouds and an unnatural stillness that pressed against the skin like a physical weight. Rowan returned to the barracks after a grueling patrol to find a senior officer waiting outside his door. Captain Varick, a hard-eyed veteran with a smile that never touched his eyes. "At ease, Sergeant," Varick said, though his tone made it clear there was nothing easy about this encounter. "Command's making rounds, spot checks, too many reports of soldiers treating their reward improperly." Rowan's blood went cold. "Improperly, sir?" Varick chuckled humorlessly. "You know the law, Hale. Gifts from the governor are property. Pets, not comrades. Not—" He let the insinuation hang in the air like poison. Rowan forced a tight nod. "Understood, sir." "Good. Wouldn't want to find irregularities, especially with someone like you. Good soldier, decorated, shame to waste it." Varick turned and strode off, leaving the warning burning behind him. Rowan entered his quarters and found Lisa already standing, tense, her senses sharp enough to have heard the conversation through the thin walls. "You must send me away," she said quietly, her new English careful, deliberate. "Or they will destroy you." Rowan shook his head, closing the door firmly behind him. "No, I won't let them." Her hands balled into fists at her sides. "You risk everything. For what? For someone who was given to you in a cage?" He stepped closer, slow, giving her space to flee if she chose. "For you," he said simply. "Because you're not a pet. You're not a prize. You're—" He stopped himself, heart pounding. "You're the only real thing I've ever found." Lisa's breathing quickened, her luminous eyes wide with emotion she fought to hide. "You will die," she whispered. "Maybe," Rowan said. "But I'd rather die free, fighting for something I believe in, than live another day pretending I don't see who you are." The storm outside broke at that moment, a deafening crack of thunder shaking the very walls. Inside, the silence stretched between them, charged and trembling. Then, slowly, carefully, Lisa reached out and placed her hand against his chest, over the steady hammering of his heart. "You are a strange man, Rowan Hale," she said, her voice a fragile thread of wonder and fear. He covered her hand with his own, feeling the spark leap between them. Undeniable. Uncontainable. "Maybe," he murmured. "But I think we're both a little strange." They stood like that, unmoving, while the storm raged around them, a fragile oasis of defiance and hope in a world built on cruelty. And though neither dared say the words aloud, yet both knew the truth. They were no longer captor and captive. They were something far more dangerous. They were two souls reaching for freedom, and for each other. The storm howled against the outer walls for 3 days and nights, a living, breathing fury that kept the soldiers pinned inside the barracks and the command officers restless. Tensions, within the base already strained by months of brutal campaigning, began to fracture along unseen lines. Fights broke out in the mess halls. Disappearances went uninvestigated. The air was thick with suspicion, with the knowledge that when the storm ended, command would tighten its grip and blood would follow. Inside Rowan's quarters, a different kind of storm raged. He spent the hours pacing like a caged animal, planning and discarding half a dozen escape scenarios. None of them were good. Tarnus 4 was a fortress world. Every ship off-planet was locked under military control. Every exit gate was monitored. Every comm line was tapped. But he knew they couldn't stay. Lisa sat silently by the window, watching the lightning tear rifts across the sky. She had not spoken much since the encounter with Captain Varick. Rowan could feel the distance she had placed between them, not out of anger, but out of fear. Fear for him. He dropped into the chair across from her, scrubbing a hand through his hair. "We can't wait," he said finally. "If they come knocking, we won't survive." Lisa didn't look at him. "You will survive," she said quietly. "You are human. They will forgive you. Blame me." Rowan's heart twisted painfully. He leaned forward, catching her gaze, forcing her to see the fire in his eyes. "I don't want forgiveness," he said fiercely. "Not if it means living without you." The words hung between them, raw and undeniable. For a moment, Lisa seemed to falter, her guard slipping. She turned fully to him, her face illuminated by a flash of stormlight. In that moment, she was achingly beautiful, fierce and fragile, all at once. "You would abandon your world," she said, her voice breaking. "For me?" Rowan rose, crossing the space between them in 2 strides. He knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. "I would abandon everything," he said. "Worlds can burn. Empires can fall. None of it means anything without you." A choked sound escaped her, half sob, half laugh, and she leaned her forehead against his. "You are mad," she whispered. "Probably," he said, smiling despite the gravity of their situation. Another roll of thunder shook the building, but neither of them flinched. "We leave at first light," Rowan said. "Storm or no storm." Lisa pulled back slightly, her hands still gripping his. "How?" He grimaced. "I have an idea. It's reckless, dangerous, and almost definitely suicidal." Her lips curved into a faint, daring smile. "Then it suits us." That night they lay side by side on the narrow bed, fully clothed, not touching but close enough to feel each other's warmth. Sleep eluded them both, but neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. Every breath shared was a promise. When dawn bled red across the storm-torn sky, they rose in silence, ready to defy the world. The plan was simple because it had to be. Complexity was death when every second counted. Rowan's old friend, a technician named Briggs, was their only lifeline, a wiry, quick-witted man with a healthy disregard for regulations. Briggs had once joked that he could hijack a dropship blindfolded. Now Rowan was calling in the last of his favors. They met Briggs near the southern hangar, under the guise of a maintenance patrol. The storm had left half the surveillance systems offline. Luck, or perhaps something more. Rowan didn't question it. Briggs took one look at Lisa, her hood drawn up to hide the glow of her skin, and whistled low. "You're insane," he muttered. "You know that, right?" Rowan grinned without humor. "Saving lives always looks insane to cowards." Briggs chuckled darkly and handed over a stolen access card. "Bay 12, old courier ship. Fast, ugly, unregistered." "Perfect," Rowan said. He clapped Briggs on the shoulder. "Thank you." Briggs shook his head. "You don't owe me, Hale. But when they find out, you better be gone." Far gone. No further words were needed. Rowan and Lisa moved like shadows through the broken corridors of the base, slipping past guards distracted by storm damage and internal chaos. At Bay 12, the battered courier vessel sat waiting, its hull scarred from countless atmospheric entries. Rowan keyed the access panel. The hatch hissed open. "Go," he urged, glancing over his shoulder. "Quickly." Lisa hesitated. She turned to him, her luminous eyes wide with something that looked terrifyingly like hope. "Together," she said. He nodded. They scrambled inside, sealing the hatch behind them. The cockpit was cramped but functional. Rowan slid into the pilot's seat, fingers flying over unfamiliar controls, praying that muscle memory and sheer stubbornness would carry them through. The engines coughed, sputtered, and roared to life. Alarms blared across the hangar. "Unauthorized launch detected," a mechanical voice droned. Rowan cursed under his breath and slammed the throttle forward. The ship lurched, scraping sparks against the hangar's edge, but it soared upward into the boiling sky, leaving the base and the chains that had bound them both behind. Pursuit came quickly. Sleek military interceptors flashed onto their radar, closing fast. "Hold on!" Rowan shouted, wrenching the ship into a wild dive through the dense storm clouds. Lightning flashed so close it set the cockpit aglow, turbulence tossing them like leaves on a river. Missiles locked. Alarms shrieked. Lysa gripped the seat's edge, her knuckles white. Rowan gritted his teeth and pushed the engines beyond safety margins, aiming for a gap in the storm ahead. A corridor of relative calm that led straight to the planet's outer atmosphere. The interceptors fired. Rowan jerked hard to the left, the ship's frame groaning in protest. One missile streaked past, detonating harmlessly in the clouds. The second clipped their port wing, sending a shudder through the entire vessel. Smoke filled the cabin, acrid and thick, but they broke through the storm, punching into the stratosphere, the stars stretching above them in dazzling clarity. The pursuing ships hesitated. Orders prevented them from firing beyond the planet's defensive perimeter. Rowan slammed the jump drive into activation. The ship shuddered, screamed, and then, with a wrenching pull, slipped into hyperspace. Silence fell. Rowan leaned back in the seat, breathing hard, every muscle trembling with spent adrenaline. Beside him, Lysa turned, her face illuminated by the soft starlight pouring through the cracked viewport. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it," Rowan corrected. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, he allowed himself to smile. A real smile, born not from defiance or exhaustion, but from something infinitely more precious, hope. They were free. Bruised, hunted, outlaws in the eyes of the Empire, but free. And together, they would forge a new destiny among the stars, where no one would ever again cage what was meant to be wild and beautiful. The stolen ship limped through hyperspace, its wounded frame creaking and groaning like an old warhorse pushed beyond its limits. Emergency systems blinked in chaotic patterns across the cockpit panels, each red light a warning Rowan ignored for now. They had escaped Tarnus 4. That was what mattered. Rowan sat hunched over the navigation console, his face illuminated by the cold glow of distant stars, searching for a destination, far enough, hidden enough, that the long arm of the human empire would not reach them. Lysa stood behind him, silent, her hand resting lightly on the back of his seat. Not holding on, just there. She no longer hid her presence around him, no longer hovered near the edges of the room as she had once done in the barracks. Now she moved freely, her steps silent but unafraid, her luminous skin casting faint reflections on the dark walls. Rowan found himself glancing up at her between keystrokes, drinking in her presence as if reassuring himself she was truly here, not a fevered dream conjured by guilt and longing. "There's a sector," he muttered, voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Uncharted, we're damn close. The Kithaeron star maps you gave me show systems the Empire doesn't even list. If we make it there, we vanish." Lisa's hand brushed his shoulder, soft, deliberate anchoring. "You trust my maps?" she asked, the faintest curl of a smile at the edges of her mouth. Rowan looked up at her, feeling his heartbeat slow and steady under her touch. "I trust you," he said simply. The words hung in the cabin, more solid than steel, more binding than any vow. For a long moment they simply breathed together, suspended between stars and broken futures. Then Lysa squeezed his shoulder once and moved to help him plot a course. Together they worked in the dim silence, threading a path into the unknown. Later, after the ship had stabilized and the autopilot hummed a soft reassurance, they found themselves seated side by side in the tiny galley, sharing the last of the salvaged rations. Rowan tried not to think about how little food remained, how crippled the life support systems were. For now they had time to breathe, to exist, to hope. "You never asked," Lysa said suddenly, breaking the quiet, "what I was before the cage." Rowan set down his cup, regarding her carefully. The question was not idle. It was an offering. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready," he said. Lysa tilted her head, studying him, then gave a soft huff that might almost have been a laugh. "I was a dream weaver," she said, "one who shaped the soul stories of my people." Rowan frowned. "Dreamweaver?" She smiled faintly. "I wove visions during the night of crossing, the night a child becomes an adult. I showed them not just what they were, but what they could become." Rowan sat back, stunned by the weight of what she revealed. "And they put you in a cage," he said bitterly. "They took a creator of futures and tried to chain her." Lisa's gaze softened. "And you set her free." Rowan shook his head. "You were never truly chained, Lisa. They just couldn't see you." She reached across the small table then, her fingers brushing his hand with a touch feather-light but filled with purpose. "You saw me," she said, and he understood then, with a clarity sharper than any battlefield revelation. Whatever came next, wherever the stars led them, he would spend every breath he had proving that she was right to believe in him. The ship drifted into the edge of the unknown sector 3 days later, battered but intact. The skies beyond the viewport shimmered in strange colors, nebulae twisting like living tapestries woven across the void. Rowan leaned forward in his seat, his hand tight on the control stick. Ahead, nestled in the heart of a cradle of asteroid fields and broken moons, was a planet, untouched by human war, green, vibrant, alive. Lisa stood beside him, her hand resting lightly against the viewport, her luminous skin casting strange reflections on the glass. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Rowan smiled tiredly. A new world. No orders. No chains. Just us. The landing was rough but survivable. The ship skidded across a plain of violet grass, kicking up a cloud of shimmering dust before groaning. To a final, merciful halt near a crystalline river. Systems flickered and died. The ship would fly no more, but they didn't care. They stepped out into the alien sunlight together, blinking against the brightness. The air was sweet and heavy, with the scent of strange blooms. Trees with silver bark towered overhead, their leaves humming gently in the soft wind. For the first time in what felt like forever, Rowan breathed without the weight of duty crushing his chest. Lisa turned to him, her face open, radiant, beautiful, beyond words. "We are free," she said, her voice a blend of wonder and fierce pride. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "We are," he agreed. And in that vast, uncharted land with nothing but the stars to bear witness, Rowan Hale and Lisa, once prisoner and soldier, now simply two souls intertwined, began to build a life where no cages existed, only dreams waiting to be woven. Together, they would create a future no empire could ever steal. A future born not of war and conquest, but of love and the unbreakable freedom that love had forged between them. The first days on the new world were both harder and sweeter than Rowan could have imagined. The wrecked ship provided little shelter beyond the broken hull, forcing them to adapt quickly to the alien environment. Rowan, ever the soldier, scavenged what he could from the wreckage, wiring, panels, even old survival kits tucked in forgotten compartments. Lisa, with hands that once wove dreams, wove survival instead, binding shelter walls from the supple vines of the silver trees, crafting water filters from crystalline rocks and hollowed roots. They learned together, failing often, laughing sometimes, but always rising again. The land was not empty. Strange creatures roamed the violet plains, great winged beasts with translucent hides, small luminous animals that blinked in and out, of sight like living stars. But none were hostile. This was no war zone, no march of boots and blood and banners. It was life, raw and real and unscripted. Under Lisa's guidance, Rowan learned to read the signs of this place. The way the river sang louder when storms approached, the soft tilt of flowers that indicated fertile ground. She taught him not through lectures, but through touch, gesture, shared experience. Their shelter grew into a home, their days into rhythms. Rowan found strength he hadn't known he still possessed. Not the hardened resolve of a soldier, but the gentle, unyielding strength of a builder, a protector. And Lysa, free from the chains that had once tried to define her, bloomed like the wild flowers around them, her laughter more frequent, her songs returning. Under the twin moons one evening, as the sun melted into the hills and painted the sky in brilliant shades of gold and violet, Rowan sat beside the fire they had built from silverwood branches. Lysa curled close to him, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "The world you left behind?" Rowan thought of the barren outposts, the endless wars, the faces of men who had forgotten how to dream. "No," he said without hesitation. "That wasn't living, that was surviving. This," he gestured to the fields stretching endlessly beyond their camp, "this is living." Lysa lifted her head to look at him, her eyes shining in the firelight. "You saved me," she said, "but you also saved yourself." Rowan smiled, pulling her gently into his arms. "We saved each other," he whispered. Above them, the stars bloomed, across the sky, endless and full of promise. And in their hearts the seeds of a new world had already taken root. Seasons shifted, and with them Rowan and Lysa's bond deepened beyond mere survival. They built more than a shelter now. They built a life. A grove of shimmering trees bore fruit that sustained them through the long seasons. Rowan carved tools, mended their dwelling, explored farther each day. Lysa planted gardens not just for food but for beauty, swaths of color across the hills that thrived under her careful tending. They spoke often in the evenings of what might come next, of others, of someday welcoming more refugees, those like them who sought not conquest or dominion, but freedom. It was Lysa's idea first, to make this planet a sanctuary, a place where no sentient being would ever be caged again. Rowan had chuckled at first, calling her an idealist, but he knew better than anyone the power of a dream, especially a dream born from broken chains. One night, as another storm rumbled on the distant horizon and firelight danced across the walls of their home, Rowan knelt before Lysa in the heart of the Silver Grove. He didn't have a ring, no precious metals mined from dead worlds, but he had woven a simple band of starlight vines, their tendrils glowing softly in the twilight. He held it out to her, his voice unsteady but certain. "Lysa," he said, "I never believed in destiny until I met you. You turned my cage into a path. You made me more than a soldier. Will you stay with me, not because you must, but because you choose to?" Lysa's breath caught in her throat, tears brightening her dark eyes. She knelt before him, cupping his scarred, weathered hands in her own. "I chose you the moment you opened my cage," she said. "I choose you every day." He slid the vine ring onto her finger and she pressed her forehead to his, their souls binding in a vow older and stronger than any empire's decree. In that grove of living stars with the universe vast and unknown before them, Rowan, Hale, and Lysa wove a new dream together, a dream of freedom, a dream of love, a dream of a world where no one would ever again be forced to kneel behind iron bars. And somewhere far away in distant palaces of stone and steel, rulers and warlords slept uneasily, never knowing that the greatest revolution had already begun, not with armies, not with banners, but with a soldier who refused to obey, and a girl who had once been caged.